My name is Dustin Wheeler. My family calls me Dut Duck, and my love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go. Welcome back, all my feathered friends of the wine world. Want to welcome you guys into what I'm looking forward to as a very fun episode. We're going to kind of be shooting from the hips here in a Wild West kind of a region in Italy. And that is in Tuscany. And it's an interesting place when we talk about it as a whole because of just how many things are intertwined here. But at the same time, there's a whole bunch of structure and then not so much structure. It's kind of all over the place. So it makes for really unique wine opportunities that are just unique and kind of one-off to Tuscany themselves. So buckle up, get ready for a fun episode, and let's take it away. I want to start off just by giving kind of an overview of Tuscany as a region and see if we can kind of give you a visual mental map that'll explain some of the uniqueness that's going on here. So in Tuscany, very famous cities around, Siena and Florence are probably two of the most well-known names. When you get into Tuscany, we're looking on the west side of Italy, kind of up near the northern side before Italy starts to flare out to create that kind of T shape at the very top. So the last couple episodes, we talked Piedmont, northern Italy. That's a wee bit above us. So we're starting to head down the peninsula of Italy. There's a few different regions inside of Tuscany, some very important ones. The ones that I want to bring up that are going to be main players in when we're going to go shop for wine, the ones that we're more likely to run into. And those are regions such as Bulgari, Chianti Classico. When you get into Chianti, there's a bunch of these little sub-regions as well, like Chianti Rufina. And there's a lot of these smaller ones. But we're going to kind of lump them together for this episode because, again, we're doing a little bit more broad of approach before diving really into it. And Chianti kind of sits right in the middle of this region. So if you go a little bit south of Chianti Classico, you'll run into Montepulciano, Montalcino, and as you go around the southern tip of this region, you run into like Savannah, as well as a few other just really neat regions. And off the coast, there's a little island, Elba, as well. So I just kind of wanted to get that going in your mind, some of the bigger names there before we fully jump in. So Tuscany as a region is one of the most famous kind of prolific wine regions anywhere in Europe. There's so many, even in media outside of the wine industry, that revolve around Tuscany and falling in love in Tuscany and this, that, and the other. It's not hard to find references and a love for this area. It is everywhere, and it's very well deserved for that. Tuscany as a wine is really known, probably best for its Sangiovese red wines, which definitely dominate the output, and they can get expensive. And you know, it includes everything from Chiantis to Brunellos, to Vino Nobles. But if you kind of take a step up from there, there is in Tuscany a group of wines called Super Tuscans, which we'll touch on here in a bit, that really drives the big money market moves. And Pasito dessert wines. So from all of these different wines, this region really offers it all. Situated, like I said, in that kind of northern central Italy, it's picturesque rolling hills. There's medieval villages, cypress-lined avenues, and it's gorgeous. And a lot of tourism ends up here. The region's top wines are officially recognized and protected by 41 DOC and 11 DOCG titles. There are 6 IGP or IGT designations as well. So you have wines from all degrees of quality going on. As in most cases with Italy's 20 region, it has a long wine history. The wine history here in Tuscany can be traced back to 7th century BC. They found remnants of wine amphoras that were excavated out of the region. The history of viticulture in Tuscany dates back to its settlements by the Etruscans in the 8th century BC. With those amphora remnants that we were talking about that have now been proven to originate in this region, but have been found elsewhere in Italy, also shows the exportation of Tuscan wines all the way back as early as the 7th century, and it's even been found in Gaul as well. By the 3rd century BC, there were many literary references, especially by Greek writers, about the quality of Tuscan wines. So from the get-go, they were known as a big player in the wine industry and the wine world. Throughout the Roman Empire, wine became part of the daily diet, especially for the upper class. Jump ahead a little bit here, and by the end of the 1200s, the city of Florence was populated with wine merchants. The Arte dei Vinatali was established in the city as a guild for wine professionals to basically kind of pledge allegiance to, almost like as a union in a sorts. It was, in some degrees, these DOC and these quality controls before any of those were established. They started with some pretty strict regulations on how the Florentine wine merchants could conduct business. So no wine could be sold within 100 yards of a church. Wine merchants were also prohibited from serving children under the age of 15 or to prostitute ruffians and thieves. No wine for you. In the 14th century, an average of 7.9 million gallons of wine were sold out of... I am trying to say Florence, and I'm thinking Tuscany, so I wanted to say Torrance. Sorry. The wines were sold every year in Florence. 7.9 million gallons of wine. At the same time, throughout the country, the writers, poets, and artists were enriching their work because of wine and the wine culture. So, again, we see in not just modern pop culture, but even in the 1200s, many of the plays and poems and music was written around wine as well. So there were numerous family of wine producers in Tuscany established throughout the 13th and the 14th century, which today are very historic, well-respected families. Antinori, Guido Alberto, Marchese di Frescobaldi, Baron Riacosoli, and the list just goes on. And even as families have continued to work, even if they don't have that huge history from the 13th and 14th century, it is become such a part of family life in Tuscany. Even modern wineries like Tuarita that produce just phenomenal Tuscan wines. And they're only 2 or 3 generations in, but have established themselves as great players in Tuscan wine, great quality producers, and something that you should definitely put on your radar to try. In 1716, for the first time, the Grand Duke of Tuscany decided to define 70,000 hectares of area for Chianti for production of quality wines. So this made history as the first legally enforced example of a DOC. Again, this was before, though, Italy became a unified country. At this point, they were just operating as independent states. So it made it very interesting. But again, a trendsetter, creating some unique wines, but also creating those quality controls as well that a lot of regions and other countries use as well. So let's talk a little bit more kind of on the weather side of things. So climate is a vital factor in this region's success. You have temperate coastal areas, and they're contrasted by inland areas, which really increase the diurnal temperature variations to really increase and help maintain the grape's balance of sugars, acidities, aromatics, things like that. So remember, diurnal shifts is the change from daytime temperature to evening temperature. So when we're waiting for grapes to ripen and get ready for picking baskets, getting ready for picking, when you have it hot during the day and then cold at night, it's almost like if you were to put something in a freezer and think of like a soup. If you had a hot soup and then you threw it in the freezer, it would cool down relatively quickly, but those flavors would still be able to intermingle. Of course, you don't want to freeze it all the way, but if you're trying to chill it off cooler, quicker, and let those flavors really work together, it's a great thing to do. A lot of restaurants you'll see using ice paddles to cool off the soup and get it down, but still have those flavors intermingling. When it's hot during the day, the grapes start to ripen and release all its things, but you don't want it to cook 24/7. It needs time to rest, just like a person would. So it can really maintain a balance of acidity and sugars. If it is constantly hot, all it can do is produce sugar. Makes for very big wines, very alcoholic driven wines, but not really well balanced. Those diurnal shifts will come through and let that acidity build. So you have both sides of the coin, so to speak. Summers here are hot. I mean, we've all heard under the Tuscan sun. So probably didn't surprise anybody by stating that fact. And it's a real kind of problem in some of the lower altitudes where the valleys can be. So Sangiovese, as a grape, prefers high volumes of sunshine. So most of the vineyards are planted more on the hillside to maximize exposure. And if you're looking for wines of higher quality, you'll want to look for the ones that are on the hillside. If you go down into the valleys, those are going to be the bulk wine productions. So finding out where you're potential wine bottle you're about to buy is located. Are they on a hillside? That's an important thing. So Poggio in Italian is an important word to look for on labels. Poggio translates in Italian to like knoll. It is a nod to a very famous vineyard. You'll see a few different wineries list this on their label. They'll also list it on some of their wines that don't come from this vineyard as a nod, just like we saw in France, the Côte as a slope. These, again, are super vital, important areas of vineyards that maximize that sunshine. And so on a label, they're trying to tell you that this wine came from a more premier location. So if you see that on a Italian wine, you know that they're trying to give you a sense of place, but kind of an elevated experience as well for your wines. Rainfall here is really concentrated into autumn and winter months. There is some snowfall possible, but doesn't really have a huge effect in the wine industry, thankfully. In more recent years, though, this region has endured periods of drought that have really reduced yields in the vineyards. So it's making it really difficult to get some vintages in stores, in restaurants, and labels. So if you find a good Sangiovese, a Brunello that you like, and it's at a great price, snatch it up while you can. So talked about Sangiovese, the big player in Tuscan wines. It is such a big player. It's probably one of the, if not the most important native Italian grape. It accounts for around 2/3 of all plantings. 85% of the red wine in Tuscany is Sangiovese. I've brought up a couple of terms like Vino Nobile, Brunello, de Montalcino. What are those? So those are regions that are known for clones of Sangiovese. For the Vino Nobile Montepulciano, the grape is known as Brunello Gentile, as well as the Brunello clone is Brunello as well. So Brunello translates into little brown one. These make really unique Sangiovese wines that offer a different little twist from what you would just get out of Chianti. For me, personally, Brunello, like I explained when some people are looking at lists, I think Brunello is more intensified. When they're referring to the little brown one, it is a darker skinned grape than traditional Sangiovese. So you get those nuances transferred into the wine due to that. Vino Nobile from Montepulciano, for me, is a little more gentle. A lot of times in this area, the vineyards are even higher in elevation than Chianti. So you get a bit more acidity out of these wines than you would see out of Chianti or Chianti Classico. And being that it's a little higher, a little cooler, I don't see as much fruit into it. It's not a full mineral, earth-driven wine. It's in some ways a little more tamed than you will get out of a Chianti. When I think Chianti, I think of a well-rounded food wine that just kind of gives you that acidity to go with tomatoes. Vino Nobile might come off a little more gentle and really a complement to enhance flavors around it, not something that just kind of goes toe to toe with it. So it's these are all great examples of Sangiovese, great wines to try. If you were to ask me, I would put like Vino Nobile at a 6, Sangiovese at a 7, and then like Brunello's at a 9. That's one way I kind of like weigh them out when people are like, what is the difference here? Why do we have all these different kind of areas I've never heard of? So that's my take on that. Now, there are some small amounts of Cannonau, which you'll see becoming a little bit more popular. But if you search for Tuscan wines, you may notice Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot kind of sneaking in there. So where did that come from? Well, that takes a play out of the book of Robert Parker and creates some wines called Super Tuscans. We're about to take a dive into Super Tuscans because it's a really unique world. But before I go there, I don't want to overlook the whites because I think once we go down this nerdy rabbit hole of Super Tuscans, we may forget about our white wines here in the area. So Trebbiano, or Ugani Blanc, is the most planted white variety, followed by Malvasia and Vermentino. You do see some international varieties like Chardonnay and Sauv Blanc, Viognier, but usually those are more focused in like the IGP wines. So, alrighty, here we are. Time to tackle the Super Tuscans. So, Super Tuscans are this unique area. When we get into most wine regions and we start talking about wine and even, Chianti and Brunello and Vino Nobile and blah, 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 all of these usually have a setup of it must be 75% Sangiovese. It must be 100% this. It's got to have 80% this and no more than 20% that. Super Tuscans really kind of broke that mold. And to me, it's kind of interesting outside of, the U.S. and some of the New World countries that this is really a unique region into that kind of player that has the notoriety that it does. And it makes me kind of wonder why we don't see it more in other places. But essentially, there is no real rule on what grape has to be in Super Tuscan. The really only kind of rule that's there is it has to be grapes from Tuscany. So it has to be Tuscan wine grapes. And I don't mean like only native Tuscan wine grapes. I just mean that it has to have been grown in Tuscany when it was picked. Like you can't go in the Piedmont and grab those grapes and bring it down to Tuscany and then call it Super Tuscan. You can't do that. But long as the grapes are grown there, they were planted there and grown there, it can have a play in the world of Super Tuscans. So Super Tuscan's unofficial category. It's not recognized within the Italian wine classification system, sort of. There are a lot of wines that kind of take claim, but as being the first Super Tuscan. But Sassicaia, as almost everyone agrees to, is the original creator of what we call Super Tuscans as of today. How the story goes was Mario Rochetta planted Cabernet Sauvignon at Tenuta San Guido in Bulgari in 1944. and for many years was the Marchese's personal wine. He made it just for himself and his family and friends that they would drink around, and people were just dumbfounded by it, like how good it was. So 1968, the first vintage was released, and then commercially it went in 1971. When this started to happen, they could not be classified as any kind of DOC or anything like that. At that time, you had to you had to have at least 70% Sangiovese to get any kind of recognition on their label. So during this era, when these Super Tuscans first came out, they were classified as Vino di Tavola, which is literally the lowest designation you can put on an Italian wine. But by the end of the 1970s, consumer marketing or market for the Chianti wines was suffering. They were being perceived as lacking in quality and flavor. Chianti was getting known as bulk production. And I think this is where Chianti starts to get that kind of rap where we've all seen the bottles as you go into an Italian restaurant where they wrap them in that straw, that classic Italian looking bottle. But Italy was struggling, and some of the critics were struggling to find something to be excited about until they stumbled upon Sassicaia. And Robert Parker was a huge player in giving these wines their recognition as being not only unique, but super high quality. And the craziest part about it was, even though these were Vino di Tavola wines, they were still already demanding high retail pricing before they got all the recognition that we know them for today. So really, really interesting. Another big player, Marchese Piero Antinori. If you go around Tuscan wines, the Antinori family is everywhere. He's one of the first to create a Chianti style wine that ignored DOC regulations. In 1971, he released the Sangiovese Cabernet Sauvignon blend known as Tignanello. In 1978, he was inspired by Sassicaia, of which he was given the sale agency by his uncle. This started just kind of a huge trend in Tuscany as a whole, and soon prices for Super Tuscans were beating Chiantis and Brunellos. Super Tuscan producers sought to create a wine brand that would be recognizable on its own merits by consumers. So by the late 1980s, the trend of creating high-quality non-DOC wines had spread to other regions of Tuscany, as well as Piedmont and the Veneto. Again, just trend-setting here. It's really, really interesting what these wines have become. You can get so many different examples of what you could quote unquote call a Super Tuscan. I think of Bonfils Oscar. That's 100% Merlot. The Tignanello, like we talked about, is Sangiovese and Cabernet Sauvignon. Sassicaia is Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. There's all sorts of different blends. You know, a lot of them are quote unquote Bordeaux blends. You know, your typical like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, things like that you'll see into them. But this region has become a huge player, not only because of the name, but everything that it has to offer from a climate standpoint and weather, all the way across, it's just allowed these wines to be successful. So as much as we love Tuscany and in our movies and our TV shows, grapes love it just as much and give us some of the best examples of what they can be in this one region. So I know you guys have heard me. I think you guys have seen my excitement for Italian wines, and this is part of it. What Italy gives to us from a climate perspective, from a variety perspective, quality, all just super phenomenal. I had a table ask me the other night during service, "Hey, we're going to Italy. What do we do? Like, where should we go? What should we try?" And I said, a lot of the names that you can recognize, don't miss out on them if you want to do that. But I said one thing not to miss out on is table wines. Like the wines that aren't even labeled when you go into the grocery store. Those are picked and made fresh and made to be drank right away. And it's a unique wine experience, especially being there, that you can't get here. They're not bottling those and sending them to us. It makes no sense to export them. But it's just another example of how unique and just what all Italy can give us for wines, that even from a basic table wine without a label and you just go in and it's white or red and that's it, can still give fantastic examples, all the way up to multi-$100 bottles of Sassicaia. It's a fantastic region. I love Italian wines. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. I can't wait to revisit Tuscany and really, really deep dive into Super Tuscans and Chiantis and Brunellos, because even these little subregions have such unique opportunities and examples of just high quality, unique, flavor filled, expressive wines that just keep on giving. So I appreciate each and every one of you listening. I hope this has been a fun episode for you. Please continue to download and tell your friends and just keep sharing as you have been. We did get some exciting news from a publisher recently, so you might see something from that coming soon in the works. So thank you again for your support. I really appreciate you guys. As always, follow us on social media. I hope you had fun. Maybe you learned a thing or two, but the most important thing at the end of the day is we got to drink some wine. Have a great time, and I'll see you next time.